Hi to everyone. Kieran McCarthy is my name. I'm a local historian based in Cork City. I've written a number of books on the fab city of Cork and also on the county of Cork and the harbour and the River Lee. I'm also an independent city councillor, so I have an interest in the past, present, and future of Ireland's southern capital, Ireland's southern region. Perhaps just to give context to some of my words this morning, Cork City is very lucky. I mean, it's experienced every phase of Irish urban development. So when we talk about Cork 100 years ago, we're probably talking about the seventh or eighth phase of Cork's development. So we went from early Christian monastery to Viking Age Cork to walled town of Cork to Georgian Cork to Victorian Cork. And 20th century Cork is an amalgamation of all those kind of different strands and phases of development. So when you enter Cork in 1920, you meet a city that's still quite small. It's not sprawling. Certainly, many of its swampland, much of its swampland, many of its marshy islands have been developed upon. There are still strands within its eastern side around the marina that haven't kind of been developed upon. But you're dealing with a city that its population is very much confined to its city centre and to around, we'd say, Barrack Street area, Bandon Road area, around the north side of the city. You're talking, we say, the Shandon Street area, the Fair Hill area. So you're not dealing with kind of a sprawling city, and the population was 80,000 people. Now, one could argue that 10,000 of those people made money and made money very well, and probably 70,000 people didn't do so well. It is, when you look at some of the archives and city library accounts from 100 years ago, you can see that sort of class divide. The class divide is certainly within the employment sectors. It is said, and it's recorded, that 100 years ago, the great and powerful butter market of Cork was in decline. This was a market that 200 years previously to 1920, let's say 1720, was beginning to export, we say, 75 to 100,000 barrels of butter. Much of that trade, we were outcompeted by 1920 by markets in Denmark and the Netherlands, the emergence of the margarine product, and so a lot of people lost their jobs. You're also dealing with industrial decline in some of our woolen mills and some of our leather manufacturing kind of plants or mini factories in the Blackpool area. So unemployment was high. It was hard for what I call the working class, or for the labourer in the city. The labourer was also living in large slum-like conditions. It is said that 1/9 of the city's population, so 1/9 of the 80,000 people, lived in falling down cottages, slum-like conditions. So you're talking, some of them lived in old 19th century mansions within the city centre, where you're dealing with creaky, falling apart stairs. You're dealing with 10 people living in an old 19th century apartment. You're also dealing with open gutters, open sewers in the main street, faulty public lighting. But contrasting that against, we say, the middle to upper class, there were areas like Montenotte and St. Luke's were coming into their own. If you ever walk up Montenotte in particular, you'll see these gorgeous late Victorian, like 1890s, 1900 apartment blocks to a degree, if that's how we could describe it in our time. You're also dealing with more middle to upper class housing in places like Sunday as well, Ballintemple, Blackrock. These became the well-to-do places to live. But if you wanted to visit the slums, you just have to go off Barrack Street, Shandon Street, off present-day Grattan Street. And I do have an account actually here. There was a lecture actually in December 1917 by a guy called DJ Coakley, and he was principal of the Cork School of Commerce. And he delivered a lecture called General Principles of Housing and Town Planning. And the specific focus was on Cork. And then just to quote what he said about the slums, he said, quote, "There was endless drudgery, such as taking water up 4 or 5 flights of stairs. It uses all of the energy of the mother, who has neither time nor strength to give to the care of her children. From these breeding places of mental, moral, and physical deterioration emerged the work-shies and unemployables, born and bred in unsanitary slums with the gutter for the playground," end quote. So these are very powerful descriptions of life 100 years ago. I suppose we did have a number of hospitals trying to support people in the city. We had a number of charities. I would have to mention like the Presentation Brothers, the Presentation Sisters, the Sisters of Mercy, the Sisters of Charity, institutions like St. Vincent de Paul, the Cork Sailors Home. They all try to support people in their heyday to get through this very difficult and kind of challenging time. So I just have a small account by, we're lucky we do have some medical and surgical reports in 1920. And it is said that the 1917 report for the South Infirmary, it said the chief causes of death were acute lung and kidney disease. There was also fever and typhus. There was also chronic infections. In the report itself from 1917, the South Infirmary actually commented upon that many people are hopeless on admission. That's a quote they actually used. In the surgical ward in 1917, there was nearly 600 cases were treated. 34 people actually died. The treatment of many cases, very many were of a serious nature, requiring immediate kind of operation. And of course, you're dealing with a time where they don't have the modern world of medicine that we actually have. One could argue like 100 years ago, there was still an opposition really to vaccination. There was poor, there was hospital overcrowding. And the city would have had like the South Infirmary, the North Infirmary, the Mercy Hospital. Many of these hospitals, some of them drew on Cork Corporation grants, some of them didn't have Cork Corporation grants. So overall, looking at 1920, it was this difficult time. So if you went back in a time machine, I think you're dealing with filth and dirt in the streets, you're dealing with gravel lined streets, you're dealing with horse and carts, you're dealing with the age of trams, and also dealing with the Irish War of Independence. And also in December 1920, you're dealing with half our main street being burnt out by the Black and Tans in mid-December 1920, and this whole kind of rebuilding. So it's an interesting time to live in, and there was a lot of challenges. So there were public health acts that did try to actually to help people. Many of these public health acts actually came through from Westminster law, and it very much was about providing funding to the Corporation of Cork to clean up the streets, to have some interventions in fixing up some of the falling down slum housing, and also to create actually new housing. So we do have the Medical Superintendent Officer of Health report from 1917, and it said that there's something like 81,000 pounds was spent in clearing unhealthy and dilapidated areas, and also providing some like 532 houses and 11 houses of 33 flats for the labouring classes. That's the quote in 1917. Direct intervention was needed. Unfortunately, that intervention didn't come during the Irish War of Independence, didn't come during the Irish Civil War. There was also the politics involved in the pro and anti-treaty side arising out of the truce and the treaty, and that actually delayed many things. The Corporation of Cork was disbanded in 1924 and didn't come back until 1929. But in 1929, Cork-born Dr. John C. Saunders, he was actually appointed to the post of Medical Superintendent Officer of Health. And he held that post actually for 30 years. And every year he actually produced an annual medical report. And we're lucky that we've got many of those actually reports surviving. And he actually, Dr. John Saunders, said about reorganizing the Corporation of Cork's approach to public health. He brought the city ahead of its counterparts in Ireland and the UK. He recruited qualified staff. He pioneered the establishment of several activities. So he drew on professional knowledge. He also provided like public health inspections, education for recipients of public health measures, and also he was the first person to use inoculation in Cork as well. And very much one of the public health reports he produced in 1944, he outlines that there was various activities for his public health staff. It includes food inspection and looking at the water purification methods in the city, epidemic disease prevention, healthy housing, factory inspection, maternity and child welfare. So he's bringing the war and public health actually to the people itself. And as I said, he spent 30 years I suppose, heading up this war, and was very well respected, not just in Cork, but actually across Ireland and the UK as well. And I know many of the strands he was working on were harnessed just after he actually retired in the late 1950s. And actually around 1960, there was health authorities set up in the country that went on to become they went on to become the health boards and the present day kind of HSE. So I can say that the work of John C. Saunders in the late 1920s has influenced our present day approaches to medicine and public health.